All right, I think that does it for the politics section. And yeah, I'm going to now satisfy my quench for thirst. Wait, yeah, I'm now going to quench my thirst. Yeah, people who only look at the economics section, this is what you're missing. All right, well, that takes us to economics, the economics section. Sweet, this is going to be pretty epic, hopefully. But I do like this. I do like this argument that I've come up with. Let me just try to find it here, find the notes. All right, so welcome to the economics portion of the podcast. We're going to be reviewing Aristotle's Economics, which we examined last podcast, and we're going to see how it might be a starting point for working Catholic economic theory. In the last podcast, we examined Aristotle's Economics and noted the main points. The crux of the book is the relationship between the master and his mistress, a relationship Aristotle argues is naturally higher than that between animals, since animals only act to further existence, whereas people act, the man and the wife act to further a happy existence. Both master and mistress have different duties, but they all tend towards the same end. Beginning with the mistress, then, Aristotle argues that she must avoid gossip, manage money, avoid costly raiment, and she should be one who has an inclination towards a well-ordered life. She ought to obey her husband, treating his requests as if they came from God, and pray for him that he shouldn't meet adversity. All this is Aristotle speaking, not a direct quote, my paraphrase, but yeah, this is Aristotle. Not, I should have clarified at the beginning. This is Aristotle, not Plato or Socrates. He also so the husband, for his part, must pay the proper attentions to his wife and should make her the unstinting object of his concern. He also has a duty not to be promiscuous, since he is his mistress's property. Finally, he should treat his mistress with moderation, mingled with a holy fear. The treatment of the rest of the household and of societies bigger than the household are also essential parts of Aristotle's economics. In terms of the rest of the household, Aristotle argues that there are two things to consider: materials and people. Materials include all things necessary for the proper management of the household, such as crops, garments, etc., etc., etc. People include the master and his mistress, plus any slaves or servants. Aristotle argues that the master must have four qualities: the ability to acquire things, the ability to keep what he has acquired, the ability to improve his property, and finally the ability to make use of what he has. The mistress of the household ought to keep an eye on the property as well as do more sedentary things like handicrafts and the like. In the raising of children, the master ought to see to their education, while the mistress ought to see to their nurture. Finally, slaves ought to be treated fairly, and it behooves the master or mistress of the household to set a good example for them. All right. So, having considered the management of the household, we now turn to management of larger societies. Aristotle argues that the management of the household is prior to the management of the state, since the household can exist without the state, but the state can't exist without the household. This is still a review of the last podcast, by the way. These higher forms of government include the king, the governors, the free state, and the individual. The three traits necessary for the proper administration of all of these are familiarity with the task at hand, good natural endowments, and an upright and industrious way of life. Now, the first thing I want you to notice about this summary is that there are no equations whatsoever. If you pull out a standard microeconomics textbook, which I unfortunately forgot to grab for you guys, but if you pull one out, that's what you get. Lots of equations, lots of numbers and calculus and other gory stuff. Now, these things are all right on their own. They help us to better study an aspect of a thing as part of the whole, but these equations can't be completely devoid of context. So remember what I said. Well, okay, if you saw the first philosophy video in the first full-length podcast, you remember that I did an example with Taco Bell, where as a food critic, you need to judge a taco. There are two ways of doing that. You either eat the whole taco or you isolate an ingredient and just look at that. What equations do is they take out an ingredient and just look at that. They are not a replacement for the whole taco. And that's kind of what my argument is here. Um, so these equations need context around them to properly understand, you know, why they need some sort of backing, some sort of context to be meaningful in any way. Um, so yeah, and then again, this also mirrors my argument in I think two podcasts ago. In no, it was the first economics podcast, contra positive and negative economics. Um, this is this argument that um, you need context, you need a moral value in forming your economic um, considerations, because economics by its nature as a mathematical like can only look at quantifiable things and so cannot comment on ethics. You need an ethical basis for which to base economics off of, and that was my argument in the I think first economics podcast of this series. So yeah, so kind of touching along two arguments there. So in Aristotle's economics, he supplies the context, but doesn't attempt to analyze anything statistically. So no equations, no statistics, just pure context. This is quite simply because context can be discussed without equations, but equations can't be discussed without context. In modern day economics, formulae are given to you to relate two different objects together, but remain the same whichever object is being studied, which is fine if your theory provides you the context with which to understand your equations. Unfortunately, it doesn't. In my economics courses, they didn't teach me anything about the economics of Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas or even Adam Smith or Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian School of Economics, or Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, both both students under him, or Maynard Keynes, who was a very more liberal thinker, or Joseph Schumpeter or Milton Friedman. They didn't show any of that. It was just a wall of equations and, frankly, I would say obsolete hyper rationalized ideas of what a human person is and what his aims are. um, instead of a proper economic theory, so with context, I mean, heck, even Marx can do that. Instead, what I got was game theory, indifference curves, GDP, and consumer price index, which all presuppose the rational behavior, this hyper-rational behavior, um, towards self-interested consumerism. So modern economics is engaged in a completely futile endeavor at this point to purge itself of any context whatsoever in trying to pass off its presuppositions of human behavior as axiomatic principles rather than as statements of opinion, or hey, we need to leave. We got to leave this up to philosophy, and then let them figure it out. So, how do we fix this apparent gulf between context and statistics? Well, let's return to Aristotle. Rather than abstracting from everything else except a person's desire for material goods and assuming that they always act in their own self-interest, Aristotle starts with the family and its preservation as the essential task of the household. This theory briefly touches on things within modern economics, such as the necessity for the master of the house to acquire, keep, improve, and make use of what he has. But this is only alongside a bunch of other duties that the various members of the household has, and that the husband has. So beyond this, uh, beyond this, economics, the book Economics, it introduces topics in the realm of ethics, politics, and a correct understanding of human behavior, and gives useful pointers in each. Um, in ethics, it provides the directives for the correct behaviors of the master and the mistress to each other and to their household. In politics, it postulates the different forms of government and their proper administration. Finally, in terms of the household, or in terms of the understanding of human behavior, it is not self-interest, but rather love that binds the master, the mistress, their children, and everyone else in the household to each other. Thus, this is the first thing that must be understood. Context matters, and if your context is wrong, so will your formulae be. Garbage in, garbage out. So, this notion of the family leads to a second thing we should notice, which is that the lowest unit in society is not the individual, but the family. The relationship between master and mistress takes center stage under Aristotle's system. In book 3, that was like all he talked about. Whereas under the zeitgeist of liberalism in America, it is the individual detached from other ties which takes center stage. Sorry for the fancy words. I I write like this when I get like really riled up, so you'll just have to live with it, I guess. Just keep a dictionary on hand. um, it is possible to distinguish between a person and his family or community conceptually, as long as it is understood that this isn't what the entire person is. Um, so yeah, like you can again, you can economics does have the ability, the mandate to pull out people from the relationships around them and just analyze, their individual wants and desires and stuff like that. But again, it cannot pass that study of the individual as, applicable to the whole society. Like you have to it's the individual separate from the society is different from the individual in the society, the actual whole. You gotta explain the whole thing rather than explaining part of it and then saying that it's the whole thing because, you know economics can't quantify economics isn't able to quantify the other stuff, so they must not, be important or whatever. Um, so people act in relation to the fabric of society, whether small or large, and are not the autonomous atoms that liberalism takes them to be. And by liberalism, I mean old school liberalism of the not the Reformation. Wow, of the Enlightenment in the 18th century. That a lot of the thinkers there that developed classical liberalism. This is seen by the fact that individuals are bound by all of the four governance mentioned by Aristotle to the king, to the governor, to the free state, and towards one's kin. Even in a quote unquote state of nature, people are irreducibly split into male and female and are thus by their natures related to each other and on that basis, even without any, any organization whatsoever. Like you're still either male or female, and that will lead to different that males and females are just different from each other. So there's, trying to atomize both and claim that, every person, regardless of sex or gender or whatever, ought to pursue their own path. Well, you're glossing over the fact that men and women were built for complementary but different ends, which no, sorry, different means but the same end, as Aristotle said, in the first takeaway that we had. Um, so yeah, so children are related too, like not just male and female, but children. They're related and dependent upon their parents, and people lean on each other for the things they all need. Like I'm dependent on like the supermarkets getting my family food. I'm dependent on my family for my room. I'm dependent on everybody. Like there's no uh, I'm not an autonomous unit. Like I'm not going to be able to survive with if everything is taken away from me. You have to consider people in relation to other people as a part of society. Oh, excuse me. So yeah, it just isn't true that a man can be an island unto himself. Thus, this is the second thing we can glean from Aristotle's work. It is not the self-interest of the individual, abstracted from all its relationships, which ought to underlie economic study of human behavior, but rather the interests of the family, considered both in relationship to each other and to the household. Thirdly, Aristotle proposes certain virtues which he argues are necessary for proper administration. These are familiarity with the task at hand, good natural endowments, and an upright and industrious way of life, as we saw in the recapitulation of last podcast. Note how these are all capacities or powers of the individual. Virtues, they're all virtues. This is significant because present day economics, as we saw before, presupposes the very thing it is studying and is thus unable to modify or pass judgment on the things or qualities of the things being studied. It doesn't study ethics. It doesn't study, it can't quantify virtue. Like you can't quantify how virtuous someone is. Because you don't know, and I mean, only God can do that. Um, and I don't think we have access to his spreadsheet. So, I mean, unless someone can tell me otherwise. So yeah, the this whole idea that whatever is not quantifiable must not be important is just it's just begging the question um, for modern day economics and not an actual argument in favor of it. So thus, in a conjuring act, modern economics simply assumes that there aren't things like virtues or capacities since it can't quantify them, as I just said. This is about as silly as saying that there aren't stars because we can't sense them directly. But wait, you might say, isn't Aristotle stepping on ethics' toes here as well? The answer is yes, actually, but only as we argued before that it is impossible for economics to completely divorce itself from ethics. Please see the first video for this if you haven't. So yeah, eth- um, economics or the Aristotle's economics does tread on ethics' toes, but that's because the moral norms backing up economics are properly a part of ethics and not to you know economics today as we conceive of it. And so, in that sense, a proper economics should be a subset of ethics. A subset of ethics, I would argue, studying the virtue of prudence, basically, um, rather than a uh, just a farce of like, you know, um, farce of like, this farce of like, people are only acting their rational consumerist self-interest. Like that's just not it's obsolete. That's outdated. Um, and even if it wasn't, it's still wrong. Um, so this leads us to the third takeaway from Aristotle's economics, which is that it is a part of ethics, which is just what I was saying, which deals with the management of the household and administration of government. So, yeah, it's there are it is useful. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I am saying is, you know, there 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 is a lot of bathwater, and I'm not sure that the baby is still alive down there. Um, so returning to our original question, then, how do we fix the apparent gulf between context and statistics? The answer is that statistics inform but do not replace the context which they operate under. Thus, econometrics can be considered a part of economics. So econometrics is just statistics applied to economic theories. So thus, econometrics can be considered a part of economics, just as economics can be considered a part of ethics. Thus, there are aspects of the management and administration of the household and government which are capable of being analyzed statistically, as I was saying before, and aspects of it which are not. In terms of the former, the statistics would have to be contextualized in a broader, ethical framework, and in terms of the latter, analysis must be confined to non-statistical evaluation, because statistics you can't use statistics to measure something that isn't quantifiable. So, therefore, this is our fourth and final takeaway from Aristotle's economics. Economics, properly speaking, is a subsection of ethics, while econometrics, in turn, is a subsection of economics only applicable to quantifiable material. So, in conclusion, then, there are four takeaways from Aristotle's economics. First, that if your context is wrong, then so will your sorry. First, that if your context is wrong, then so will be your statistics. Garbage in, garbage out. Secondly, it is not the self-interest of the individual abstracted from all his relationships which ought to underlie economic study of human behavior, but rather the interest of the family considered both in relationship to each other and to the household. Um, yeah. Thirdly, economics is a part of ethics which deals with the management of the household and administration of government. Finally, just as economics is a part of ethics, so is econometrics a part of economics that corresponds to the aspect of economics that is quantifiable. All right, I kind of rushed through that, but um, yeah, we have about 5 more minutes, so I'm just gonna go over those four things again in case you're still confused, or in case you missed it, because those are the four things that we have that are going to be going off of going. Sorry, those are the four things that we have that we're going to be going for, that we're going to be using to construct this this Catholic economic theory. Um, so first, garbage in, garbage out. Statistics can't can't make up for bad context or no context. Secondly, it's not individualism that rules, but rather it is not the individual, but rather the family that is the most basic unit of society. Um, Thirdly, economics is a part of ethics. And finally, statistics or econometrics are a part of economics. The part of economics that is quantifiable. Um, yeah, so I think that's about it. I actually am surprised that I got done this early, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. Thank you for making it this far in the podcast, and whether you're watching from economics only or the full length one. And yeah, God bless. Think about these things, and God bless. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you guys very much once again.